Mukashi Mukashi Ano Tokini. A long, long time ago, in old Japan, there was an elderly woman who liked to do two things. She liked to laugh, and she liked to make rice dumplings. So one day, while the woman was making dumplings, pounding the rice into flour and rolling it into a dumpling, one of the dumplings rolled right out of her hand, off the table, and onto the floor. It kept rolling and rolling and rolling until it hit a crack in the floor. So the woman chased after it, and she reached into the crack all the way up to her shoulder until suddenly the floor gave way and a chasm was opened up, and the woman fell further and further and further down into the hole. When she finally landed, the woman looked around and saw that she was on a road under the ground. She looked up the road and down the road, but all she saw were rice farms. So the woman decided to walk and look for her rice dumpling. She walked and walked and walked until she realized she was walking downhill, and she thought, aha, this must be where my rice dumpling rolled, down the hill. So she started walking a little bit faster. And then she was jogging and running until she met up with a Jizo, a guardian spirit. And she bowed to the Jizo and said to him, "Excuse me, sir, have you seen my rice dumpling rolling this way?" And the Jizo nodded and said, "Yes, I have. It rolled off in that direction, but I wouldn't go there if I were you. There's an Oni in that direction, an ogre, and he eats people just like you." Well, the woman just laughed and decided to go on her way. And she ran further and further down the hill. And soon she was in a forest, and then in more farms. And then she looked around, and there was another Jizo standing there. And she bowed to him and asked, "Excuse me, sir, have you seen my rice dumpling pass in this direction?" And this Jizo also nodded and said, "Yes, I did. It went in that way, but I wouldn't go there if I were you. There's a terrifying Oni, and he is dangerous." Well, the woman laughed even harder this time and ran even faster. And she ran until she was on a flat, level area near a river. And the woman walked up to another Jizo that she saw, and she bowed and she said, "Excuse me, sir, has my rice dumpling traveled this way?" And the Jizo nodded and said, "Yes, it did. But you have to hide right now because the Oni is coming." So the woman hid under the Jizo's sleeve for his protection. And the Oni came walking up. And he looked around and he sniffed. And he looked at the Jizo and said, "Jizo-san, I smell the smell of a human smell. Where could that person be?" And the Jizo just looked around and said, "Well, I don't see any people here. Perhaps you are mistaken." And the Oni sniffed again, and his horns wiggled. And he said, "No, I do smell a person. She must be here somewhere." And he looked in the forest, and he looked in the farms, and he looked under the river. And the woman could not help herself. She started laughing. And so the Oni turned around and went over to the Jizo and picked up his sleeve and saw the woman there. So he snatched the woman. And the Jizo said, "Wait, do not harm her. She is still under my protection." And the Oni looked at the woman and said, "I'll bet you're the one who made that delicious dumpling that rolled into my house this afternoon. I want you to work for me and always make me dumplings. I eat an awful lot, you know." And the Jizo looked at the Oni and said, "This is all right, as long as you do not harm her, or else you'll have to answer to me." And the Oni said, "Yes, yes, yes, of course." And so he carried the woman over to a boat, and with a magic paddle that suddenly grew, he rowed across the river. And he carried the woman into the kitchen and said, "Here you are. Here is 1 grain of rice." I want you to pound this into a dumpling for me. And he handed her the magic paddle that he had been using to get across the river and said, use this, and if you stir the bowl, you'll have enough rice to make me all the food that I want. So he left the woman to her work, and she put the rice bit in the bowl and started stirring, and suddenly it became 2 pieces, then 4, then 8, then 16, and 32, and it kept multiplying and multiplying until suddenly there was a mountain of rice. And the woman started laughing because she was having so much fun stirring the rice. So then she was able to make all the rice dumplings that she could ever want. For a very long time, this woman fed the Oni and his family, and she was making dumplings. And it was good work, but it was hard work, and the woman started missing her home. So one day while the Oni were all out in the woods, the woman looked around and saw that this was her chance to return. So she grabbed the rice paddle and went over to the boat and started to row across. But it was a great river, and the woman was tired from making all of the food. So she was going a lot slower than she had expected to, and the Oni caught up. And they all stood on the river end, and they saw her going across the water. So what did they do? They started drinking the water. In big, big gulps. They started drinking the water. And the woman was rowing. But she was slowing down and getting tired. And the water was getting lower and lower. Until eventually the woman was just sitting there rowing in the boat through mud. And the river was all emptied. And at this point, the woman was very mad. She wanted to return home. So she stood up in the boat and shook her rice paddle and made a face at the Oni. Ah! Which was very upset. Well, when the Oni saw her face, they couldn't help but to laugh. And they started laughing so hard that the water came out of their mouths and started filling up the river again. So the woman was able to row to the other side, and she was safe. So she got to the riverbank, climbed out of the boat, said hello to the Jizo, climbed up the hill, said hello to the second Jizo, climbed up the hill, went through the forest, and back to the farms, and said hello to the first Jizo she had ever seen. And she climbed up through the hole in her floor, and she was safe at home. The next day, the woman decided to board up the hole in her floor so that the Oni couldn't follow her. And from that day on, she did a lot of laughing and a lot of dumpling making, because now she had the magic rice paddle that would be able to multiply any grain of rice that she had. And she lived happily ever after. The end.